Welcome back to Tutorial Tidbits. I'm Elizabeth St. Hilaire, and this week I'm going to show you one of my all-time favorite studio tools. This is the Masterson Sta-Wet palette. Behold, it saves your paint for 2 weeks and yields you a sheet of collage paper every time. How could you not love this? If you're not familiar, come check it out with me. I promise you're going to love it. So today I just wanted to talk to you about why I love this Masterson Sta-Wet palette box. I used to mix my paints on paper plates and the paint would dry out and I would sometimes disperse more paint than I needed, and I'd have a pile of paint on a paper plate and there was no way of getting it back into the fluid acrylic bottle, and I would just end up throwing it out. And I was wasting paint and I felt bad about that and all the paper plates I was going through. So a fellow artist and a friend introduced me to this Masterson Sta-Wet palette system, and it's been amazing ever since. So I always put this as optional on the supply list, and I just wanted to explain to you what it is in case you're not familiar, and why I do recommend it. So basically, it's a plastic box with an airtight fitting lid. The lid goes down airtight and keeps everything inside wet. So when you take the lid off, basically what it is like a plastic box with that tight fitting lid. And this is the palette sheet. The palette sheet is a paper that is porous and not shiny. It's not slick at all. It's a porous paper because underneath it is a dirty, rotten sponge. They are clean when you buy them. They're yellow. But this is a sponge. And the sponge gets dampened, moistened, and goes into the box. The absorbent palette paper goes on top of the sponge, and that absorbent paper pulls the moisture through and keeps the paint wet on top. Now, when I'm painting, I'm mixing paints on the palette sheet, and when I'm painting, it keeps the paint wet all day with the lid off. So I can go and make a cup of tea, I could go have lunch, come back, and this is going to stay wet. My paint is going to stay wet with the lid off. When I was using paper plates, my paint was dry in 10 minutes, but this moisture system is keeping everything wet. When you have the lid on, the airtight fitting lid on, there's paint in here that is wet for weeks. So you are never going to throw away paint because it's going to stay wet in here for a really long time. So the process is that you take the palette sheet, and you can see mine sort of has a crease of 4. I fold it into fourths and I put it in a glass Pyrex dish full of water, and I microwave that water until it comes to a boil. When you notice the directions on the back, it's going to tell you to either soak it for 15 minutes in the hottest water you can get from the tap or boil it for 3 to 5 minutes. What does that do? That pushes the water all the way through the paper from the beginning. So when you put the paper onto the palette, it's wet all the way through, and that's what you want to start with. You don't want to just throw a dry palette sheet in there because that defeats the purpose of the system. The paper has to be boiled or soaked in hot water first so that the water is permeating the whole page, and then that sponge underneath is keeping it damp and pulling moisture through. So when I'm done, when I've mixed all I can mix, you can actually flip the paper over and use the other side. But I do find it to be distracting that it has color on it already for mixing. So when I'm done mixing and I've covered every bit of this and I've used all the paint, then I take the sheet out and I let it dry. So I take it out, set it aside, and let it dry. And I've still got viable paint on here, so I'm not going to do that. But what I get out of that is collage paper. These are palette sheets. The paper is really porous. It's covered with acrylic paint, and it does amazing, serendipitous, interesting things, and it becomes collage paper. So you absolutely do not waste any paint at all when you use this system because it stays wet for weeks in here, and then when you're done with it, it becomes a sheet of collage paper, and you tear this up, and you never waste any more of your very expensive golden fluid acrylic paints. Now, some people will say that when the paint stays in here wet for a couple of weeks, it gets a musty, moldy smell. Well, there's two ways you can avoid that. Right here, I've got a copper penny underneath my sponge. I think I've got two of them. Yep, here's the second one. Two copper pennies. Did you know that copper has antibacterial properties? It does. And if you put a couple copper pennies under your sponge, it helps to keep that the moisture in this box from getting kind of skunky. The other thing you can do is you can take a half a capful of bleach and mix it in with the water that you soak the sponge with, and that will help to keep the bacterial growth to a minimum. But if you want a natural solution, then copper has antibacterial properties, and that goes under the sponge and keeps things from getting moldy. So the Masterson Stay Wet palette system, it's the box. It's called the system because it's the box, it's the sponge, and it's the palette paper sheets. It's on my Amazon shopping list. I think it's a great minimal investment up front for the amount of money it saves you in paint, keeping your paint wet for crazy long amounts of time, and ultimately yielding you collage paper with the paint that's left. So that's your tour of the Masterson Stay Wet palette system. And the tip on the palette sheet is just boil it. If you've got a short attention span like me, 3 to 5 minutes boiling it is a lot quicker than 15 minutes going like this, waiting for it to soak. So that's in the fine print on the back of the packaging. And I hope that you'll try it out and let me know if you like it.